Like I said before, my name is Nathan. I have the privilege of being the parish pastor here at the Sacred Grace Inglewood. One of the things that we value here at the Sacred Grace is a variety of voices. We never really want it to be just one talking head up here. We want it to be several talking heads up here so that you get a variety of perspectives on things. In addition to that, we are a family of churches. You may or may not know that. We are not just one church. We're, at this point, a family of two, and hopefully soon a family of three churches. And because of that, we get the chance to share resources, share teachers, share leadership. And so one of the things that happens behind the scenes that a lot of you don't know about is there's this church called TNL that's been around for like a quarter of a century here in Denver. And a couple years ago, they had the courage to bring me on staff and to start planting this church. And I'm extremely grateful for that. And so one of the things that the pastor of TNL, Phil, and I do on occasion is swap, and I teach there, and he teaches here. And so tonight we have the privilege of hearing from Phil, and I'm really excited about that. So if you please put your hands together and give Phil a warm Inglewood welcome. Thank you.
Wow. Whistles and everything. Thank you. You all make me feel more welcome here than I do at my own church, and I'm not sure what to do with that. Like Nathan said, my name is Phil. I'm the pastor of TNL that meets here on Tuesday nights, and I am very excited to be here. I love teaching here. The last time Nathan let me teach was probably, I think it was the first week of Advent, so it's been a while. Some things have happened. Christmas and Easter have already gone by, and I haven't seen you guys, so... Well, I guess we spent Christmas and Easter together, so I'm a liar. But I haven't been here to teach. So thank you. I'm very excited to be here. Tonight, we are continuing on in this Eastertide series where we're talking about how Eastertide is this 50-day celebration of the resurrection. It's a courageous celebration that requires persistent hope. We're looking at stories in the Bible that take place between the time of Jesus' resurrection and his ascension. And we see a pattern develop that celebrating, that living into the truth of the resurrection requires a persistent hope. Tonight, we get to talk about one of my favorite things that apparently Nathan didn't want to talk about, is doubt. We get to talk about doubt tonight. A week or so before Easter Sunday, as we were preparing for this series focusing on persistent hope, Nathan and I met on a Wednesday morning, like we always do, with our boss, Jared Mackey, and he asked us both this question, what do you hope most for? I think he actually might have phrased it, what do you want? Maybe if you had someone ask you that, there were a lot of things that would pop in your head. I'm about to have a kid. I'm about 7 weeks away from my wife is about 7 weeks away from having a daughter, and I have tons of hopes for her, mainly that she'll be healthy and that everything will be fine and that she'll grow up and have a happy life. And this has just constantly been on my mind as I'm counting down the days that I get to meet my little girl. But that nothing to do with her popped in my mind. Don't tell her. I didn't have to think for more than a second. I instantly knew what I hope most for, and that is certainty, particularly certainty when it comes to my faith. I would love certainty that God exists, that he hears me, that he is in control. I would love to just have someone write out exactly what happens when we die. That would be really great. Because while I have faith in God, I also have doubts. We live in a complicated world. How could you not have doubts? How can you navigate integrating science and faith and not have doubts? How can you be a reasonable and rational person and still hold to some of the truths that we claim? How can you make sense of some of the horrific things that happen in the world, like chemical weapons being used on civilians in Syria, or school shootings like Florida, or like we just commemorated 19 years ago on Friday of Columbine? How do you make sense of friends' marriages ending, parents' marriages ending, your marriage ending, failed adoptions, miscarriages, children suffering abuse? How do we make sense of evil being so pervasive in the world? In my mind, there is a lot of room for doubt in our faith. Every person who has faith and is honest with themselves, at some point, at many points, I would say probably all the time, everyone who is a person of faith has doubts. And I don't think this diminishes our faith. Many heroes of the faith carried doubts. Martin Luther is famous for talking to people about his doubt. C.S. Lewis wrote books on his doubt. Mother Teresa, after she died, we found out through her correspondence that she was racked with doubts most of her life. Pope Francis, who I like a lot, it's okay if you don't. A lot of the things he says I resonate with. One of my favorite quotes of his has to do with doubt, and he simply says, "Do not panic, we all have doubts." These giants of our faith, these giants of persistent hope, which I think, sidebar, I think that a beautiful definition of faith is persistent hope. And I'm going to be using those two terms interchangeably. But so these giants of our faith, these giants of hope, also have and have had doubts. Because despite what you may have heard, doubt is not the opposite of faith or of hope. The opposite is certitude. And certitude is absolute certainty that something is true. If you think about it, an absolutely certain world is actually a hopeless world. You don't hope for things that you're certain about. That would seem kind of silly. I don't hope that I don't fall through the earth right now, because I'm pretty sure that this concrete is strong enough to hold me up. What I hope about is that I'll have enough money when I retire, or that my daughter will be born healthy. I hope that I love my wife well. Hope is for things that you hold some element of doubt about. And so doubt is an essential element of hope. And at the same time, I don't want to diminish the fact that our doubts have the power and capacity to also smother our hope. Because hope is risky, hope feels scary, hope leaves us exposed. And certainty, on the other hand, though I'm not sure it's actually possible to attain, feels safe, it feels secure, it feels protected. And so when our hopes are battered by repeated disappointments, when God doesn't show up the way that we wanted to or the way that we expected to, or maybe at all, it hurts. And we feel betrayed, we feel stupid, we feel lost, and we begin to doubt. And at times, those doubts are little more than annoyance, like a gnawing in the back of our minds, and other times they are devastatingly painful. When our deepest convictions and foundations are suddenly brought into question, it's really disorienting. There's so much dissonance in our minds when the facts that are in our heads don't line up with what we feel in our hearts, and that's not easy. It can feel like torment. And it's in these times when doubts can push us to protect ourselves and to move ourselves towards the safety of certitude. And so doubt is kind of like potential energy. Doubt is an opportunity to embrace mystery and risk and persistent hope, or to protect ourselves with the illusion of safety that certainty offers. Doubt is not the opposite of hope or of faith. The opposite of persistent hope is certitude. But God calls us to persistent hope, not to certitude. And yet so often, we are pressured to arrive at, or at least claim, some level of certainty. Like I said before, uncertainty feels really uncomfortable. It makes us feel out of control. It threatens stability in the status quo. And so in our culture, we feel pressure towards certainty from both within and outside the church. We're told more and more from outside the church that anything that you can't be absolutely certain of is an illusion that's not worth your time. Anything that can't be proven with empirical scientific data, that can't be repeated and tested in a lab and peer-reviewed, is worthless, which has bred a sense of disdain for people of faith in our culture. We're looked at as being foolish or unintelligent or simple-minded or unwilling to think or all of the above. A.J. Sherrill, a pastor who was in New York and I think now is in Michigan. Yeah, Mars Hill, he's in Michigan. He has this great quote about faith that I love. For many in our day, faith is a silly exercise of neglecting the mind. But faith is not checking your mind at the door. Faith is embracing the possibility that this world is far more mysterious than society would have you know. I love that. So this is the pressure from outside the church to arrive at certitude. On the other hand, we have pressure inside the church to do the exact same thing. And this is probably one of the things that makes me the most frustrated and angry with church culture. People of faith treat people with doubts as being inferior, as being less than. Doubt in church circles is often something to be avoided, something to be quarantined, something for us to fix in others, something for us to wage war against. And so people who have doubts, they feel like they can't voice their doubts because doubts are wrong. And doubts make God mad, and doubts might make the church reject them. I have friends who have walked away from faith because of being treated this way by churches. There's this notion that deep, strong faith is faith without doubt, but that's not faith. That's certitude. Peter Enns, a biblical scholar and author, wrote, "A biblical model of faith isn't about trying to feel certain about your beliefs, but being willing to commit to living a certain way despite the fact that you're not certain." So from both inside and outside the church, there's this desire and pressure pushing us towards certainty. And so it feels like we're caught in this tug of war between these two groups that are usually at odds but are really about the same thing, pulling us towards certitude. We're caught in the middle of them to this place actually where God calls us, the place of mystery and of faith, of hope and doubt. So if you struggle with doubts tonight, so if you are here and your heart is beating and you're still breathing, you don't need to be ashamed of your doubts. You don't need to hide your doubts. Spiritual maturity is not the absence of doubt. Doubts are opportunities to hope. Doubts push us into faith. Doubts keep us honest with God and with others. Which brings us to our teaching text this evening, which Erica is going to come read for us.
John 20, 19 through 20, and 24 through 29. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together, with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and have yet believed." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. So if doubt is part of the journey of faith, we can learn a lot from this story about doubting Thomas, which is really an unfair nickname, really unfortunate. It's not the sole aspect of Thomas's character. Peter doubts just as much as Thomas, but we don't call him Doubting Peter. Poor guy. Over the past few years, I've felt a lot of resonance with this person of Thomas. As I've taught this passage a couple of times, I see so much of myself in him, which honestly gives me a lot of hope. One commentator described Thomas as someone who expects the worst and is surprised when good things happen. And that 100% nails my personality. To understand his story of doubt that we just read about, we need some backstory into who he was. So Thomas is one of the 12 disciples, which means that he gave up a lot to follow Jesus, this nobody peasant from Nazarene. James did also, but we're talking about Thomas. Thomas gave up his family, he left his friends, and he left his life behind and loyally followed Jesus, even as resistance grew, even as his own life became in danger. We have two scenes prior to this famous doubting story that help us get a glimpse of who Thomas was. The first is in John 11. Jesus and the disciples find out about a plot by the Jewish authorities to capture and arrest and probably kill Jesus. And so they leave the city that they're in and they go out to the countryside to let things cool down. And not long after they get out there, they get word that Jesus' good friend Lazarus has died. And so Jesus says, we're going to go back to that city that we just left because I need to be there for my friend's funeral, basically. And his disciples say, "What are you talking about? Remember, we just left there because they're trying to kill you. If you go back there, they're going to kill you. And Jesus says, guys, calm down. Everything's going to be okay. This is going to be awesome. We're going back to the city. And he turns around and walks away. And I love this. Thomas turns to the other 11 guys and says, let's go die with him, and walks behind Jesus and follows him. Thomas is funny. Then again in John 14, Jesus is saying, he's telling his disciples that he's going to leave soon. And he's telling them that the place where he's going, they know how to get there. He's talking very cryptically and saying that they know the way to this place. And Thomas just calls him on it and is like, dude, we have no idea what you're talking about. How can we know the way to get to where you're going if you don't tell us where you're going? And that's when Jesus famously answers that I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so through both these episodes, in John 11 and John 14, we learn that Thomas is a loyal and courageous and honest and funny person who had a deep desire to understand Jesus and who was also a doubter. It's really good for me to hear that those things can coexist. So we pick up our story in John chapter 20. Jesus has just a few days ago been killed on the cross, and we see Thomas again, a man who gave up so much to follow Jesus and followed him with so much hope, is now crushed. He's fearful, angry, and alone. The night of Resurrection Sunday, Jesus appears to the 10 disciples, and he shows them his wounds, and they're overjoyed. But we're told that Thomas isn't with them. That's a significant detail. Thomas has just spent the past 3 years with this group of people. These are his people. He belongs there with them, but he's not with them. He's so devastated by what has happened that he's completely isolated himself. I and you also can probably relate to that. Our instinct when we face doubt and pain and suffering is to isolate ourselves, to contract back within ourselves. And so often, the exact opposite is what we need. We need to push out of our boundaries. We need to experience grace and community the most when we want to hide. And it's not helpful for Thomas that he isn't with his friends because he misses out on seeing Jesus and gets stuck with the name Doubting Thomas the rest of his life. So eventually, Thomas is with his friends again, and they all tell him about seeing Jesus, but Thomas says, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. So now he's doubting. He's hearing these accounts from his friends, but he's not convinced. Guys, I don't believe you. I don't know what happened, but I don't believe you. They're giving him what should be the greatest news that he's ever heard and should alleviate all of his grief, but his disappointment and his anguish is so deep that he refuses to hope. And he says, unless I have the exact same experience that you did, unless God meets my demands, I will not believe. He's so wounded that he's not even willing to entertain the notion that this is possible. Guys, he's dead. He's not who he said he was. The last 3 years have been a complete waste of time. Give it up. It's over. Let's stop deluding ourselves. Thomas is in pain here, and he tries to protect himself with his doubt. Thomas's disappointments, his dashed hopes have turned to doubts that are pushing him towards seeking certainty because it feels safer. Thomas is choosing certainty that what his friends are saying isn't true and that Jesus isn't who he said he was. Doubts can often protect us. Thomas's doubt protected him from the further pain of disappointment and embarrassment of being duped. What do your doubts protect you from? Maybe like Thomas, it's from painful wounds. Maybe it's from fears. Your doubts help you feel safe. They help mitigate risk. Maybe your doubts protect you from being disappointed or feeling foolish. Often, my doubts, at least in part, are a front. I want to feel sophisticated and intelligent to the people around me. I don't want to be dismissed as being foolish or simple-minded, and so I hold on to these doubts. Other times I have doubts that give me a feeling of safety, that if something goes wrong or this whole thing gets really weird, I'm close to the exits and can get out of here unscathed. So back to this story. We're told a week later, the 10 guys are back in the house, and this time Thomas is with them. Again, this is significant. Thomas is doubting, but he's persistent. He doubts the fundamental thing that keeps this group of people together, and yet he still belongs with them. This to me is a beautiful image of what the church is meant to be. And it's what I know is true of this place, that you cannot believe the same thing that other people here believe, and you can still belong here. And I know that that is true of this place, and it's part of why I decided and voted to hire Nathan almost 3 years ago, because I knew that he was a person that would cultivate a community of grace where doubt isn't frowned upon or run out of the room, but embraced. My hope is that in you belonging here, that you would develop relationships of trust, that you would begin to hear stories of other people's experiences that would encourage you to persistent hope. So this time, Thomas is with his friends, and Jesus shows up. And then he says to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Jesus shows up a week later. He's not in a rush. He lets Thomas linger for a week, hearing his friends' stories. And he shows up, contrary to what so many of us have heard about God and doubt, he's not angry, and he's not disappointed. He doesn't balk at Thomas's demands. In fact, without even really saying much, he immediately meets Thomas's demands. In compassion, Jesus gives Thomas exactly what Thomas thinks he needs most. But then he calls him to something more. He says, "Stop doubting and believe." It's not a fantastic translation. Doubting and believe there are both the same root word, which is pistos. So doubt is apistos, and believe is pistos, and pistos means faith. And so Jesus is saying, stop being faithless and have faith. Stop being hopeless and have hope. He doesn't say, stop questioning everything and be certain. He calls him to faith, to hope. He doesn't leave Thomas in doubt, but also doesn't leave Thomas with simple fact verification. Because God calls us to persistent hope, not certitude. Jesus leaves Thomas in love, calling him to relationship. And relationship with anyone, God or human, requires persistent hope far more than it requires any sense of certainty. So Thomas encounters this presence of God, the presence of God who loves him deeply, and responds in verse 28, "My Lord and my God," which is a unique Jewish phrase that they use to identify the Messiah. It's a relational phrase. And so through saying that to Jesus, Thomas is showing that he finally understands that it's about relationship. It's about persistent hope, not certitude. God calls us to persistent hope, not certitude. The scene concludes in verse 29. Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." This verse has tripped me up so much in my life. In doubt, it seems far too convenient. Of course, Jesus would say this. Of course, the author who's making this up would say, it's better for you to just take our word for it than for you to see for yourself. That's the cynical side of my brain. But there's a better explanation for this. If the resurrection is true, and if Jesus has said this, which I think he did, I think he certainly had everyone that would come to know him in the future in mind. He had you and I and everyone he knew would believe in him without seeing his physically resurrected body in mind. But we have to remember that he's also still speaking to the 11 guys standing in front of him. And he's preparing them because he knew that there were going to be many moments ahead where he was not going to be there physically. And they would need to have persistent hope. But Jesus is saying, even though you're seeing me in front of you right now, alive, complete with wounds, there's still going to be moments when the memory of this experience will not be enough to convince you that this happened. You're going to have hope. You're going to have faith. You're going to have to trust. You're going to have to risk stepping into the unknown. Certitude is not going to be an option for you. This experience instilled such a deep, persistent hope into Thomas that he went on to plant churches as far as modern-day India. He suffered greatly for his faith and eventually was martyred because he refused to reject what he believed to be true. His hope was so persistent that he faced down death. He remained faithful even when he could no longer verify a physically resurrected Jesus. Still, if you're anything like me, it's really easy to think, well, Thomas got 3+ years of walking around with Jesus, seeing him do all these amazing things, and then he got to see Jesus post-resurrection. He got to put his hand in his side, which is a really weird thing to do. And if I could do that to Jesus, I'd probably believe too. So, I think that's exactly what we need. How do we come to experience Jesus today, 2,000 years later, when there's no access to him in a physically resurrected body, when he's not standing in front of us in a physical form talking to us, inviting us to do weird things like put our hand in his side? I don't have a simple answer for this, and if there was one, you'd probably already know it. But I am convinced that the church being described as the body of Christ is not a cute metaphor. I think our purpose is to be the visible representation of an invisible God, to be the means through which the whole entire world is blessed. The church is meant to be windows through which the God of creation can again be seen and felt and heard. So in the absence of a physical, resurrected body of Jesus, God has given the world you and me and us and each other, which is an incredible calling. And it doesn't mean that we as the church are perfect or even come close to being a perfect reflection of who God is. But it does mean that we experience God through this community of saints as we offer images to the world and to each other of what true joy and love and grace and forgiveness and generosity and compassion and persistent hope look like. It's in community that we experience so many of the aspects of God. Thomas encountered Jesus not in isolation, but in the community of saints, the same community that you and I are a part of today. That doesn't make this a hard and fast rule. It doesn't mean that God won't or can't or doesn't meet us when we isolate ourselves. But I think it means because we are the physical representation of the living God, he is more readily and tangibly experienced in community. I can tell you that I only still have faith, that my hope is only still persisting because I have experienced God's love through my church community, a community of people who continually extend grace and love to me, people around me who give me hope that maybe this God exists and maybe he does love me, especially in those times when I can't bring myself to believe that it's true. So something I told TNL a few weeks ago about how we can walk through despair in our faith, which I think applies to doubt as well, is this idea: expand, don't contract. The temptation, the default, the tendency when we go through seasons of intense doubt is for us to contract, like I said before, to pull back into ourselves, to isolate ourselves. When what we need to do is the exact opposite. We need to push out of our boundaries. So if you're doubting, don't isolate yourself. Push into this place. Experience God through these people. And all of us, whether we're doubting or feel really confident right now, all of us need to be reminded that we are the visible image of an invisible God to each other and to the world, which means when our friends and members of our family in moments of vulnerability share their doubts with us, we need to be the reflection of Jesus to them in those moments. We need to meet their doubts with love and compassion, not anger or fear. We need to sit with them in their doubts. We need to be willing to say much more often, I don't know, rather than try to fix their doubts with vapid answers. We need to resist the urge to distance ourselves away from what feels like their instability. We need to help them resist the urge to isolate themselves. We have to be the grace of God to each other, especially in these moments. Another thing I want to say, if you have doubts that are pulling you towards the lure of certitude, don't hide behind your doubts. They don't actually protect you. Instead, lean into them. Learn as much as you can about whatever it is that you're struggling with. Pursue it. Read as much as you can. And try to find resources that offer insights beyond what Western white males have to say. Because there's nothing wrong with them. I am one. But we don't have a monopoly on truth. There's a lot out there for you to find, and there's a lot out there to encourage and inspire persistent hope in you. So to wrap up tonight and to review, doubt is a part of the journey of faith. It can be the means by which our hope, by which our faith is deepened. At times, it's little more than an annoyance, and at other times, it devastates us. And I know what those struggles feel like through years of my own doubt and through years of sitting with my closest friends as they endured the pain that doubt often brings. It's not easy. It feels like torture. And in those moments, what you want most is certitude. What you want is certainty and stability. The last thing that you want to think about is expanding, of pushing out into the unknown, of persisting in hope. Jesus doesn't seem to be really into rescuing us from things as much as it seems like he's into walking us through things. So while I wish I could say something to you that would magically clear up all your cognitive dissonance and alleviate all your doubt, I can't. But here is a summary of what I can offer. Everyone has doubts. You don't have to hide yours. You don't have to feel like you're bad for having them or inferior for having them. Expand, don't contract. Lean into your doubts. And finally, be persistent. Stay connected to this community. Like I said before, you cannot believe exactly like everyone else here, and you still belong here. You can have doubts and questions. You don't have to hide them. Openly share them for as long as they're with you. These doubts and questions will never ultimately be satisfied by anything that I or anyone else says, but only through an encounter with God, who is often not in a rush, who is frustratingly slow sometimes. But God is sometimes willing to let us linger in a place that we find that we belong, hearing other stories that pique our curiosity and leave our hearts open to hope, until he finally does show up, often in surprising ways, and reveals himself to us. The world around us and the world inside of us cries out for the safety of certainty, especially when we experience doubt, but God calls us to persistent hope, not certitude. Would you pray with me? God, thank you that you are so much bigger than we are. Thank you that you are not surprised by our questions or our doubting. Thank you that you don't require mental assent of us agreeing to things that we can't possibly verify to be in relationship with you. Thank you that you are so much more concerned about loving us than what we hold to be true. God, thank you that you are not offended by my questions. You are not offended when I raise my fist up at the sky and yell. You are not offended when I ignore you. You are patient and you are loving and you are kind. God, I pray for anyone in the room who is lost in doubt that you would show up, that you would stop lingering, stop being slow to show up, and that you would give them what they need to help their hope persist and continue. God, I pray that you would give them a sense of peace and a sense of your presence and a sense of your love. We love you, God. Amen.